we got together and have created a secondary platform that you had mentioned, Raising Global Kidizens, which actually has a much more global audience because we've created educational resources that go along with the 17 Sustainable Development Goals from the United Nations. And unfortunately, in the United States, the Sustainable Development Goals are still relatively new. Educators aren't maybe as familiar with them, but we found that across the globe, they're being implemented into the classrooms much more. And so we wanted to create resources for educators, both formal and informal, so that they didn't have to do the legwork of finding how can we bring sustainability into our classroom if we're just trying to teach second and third graders to read. Maybe we want a sustainability focus, but we don't have the time to research books and resources. And so we compile all of those things for educators to be able to use.
Hi everyone, welcome to Now Boarding, a new travel podcast by me, Payal Nair. This show aims at creating awareness about ecotourism, sustainable tourism, responsible travel, and a lot more. We will cover stories and journeys of people who are ecotourism specialists and those who are leaders in their field. We will also be talking to people who have had unique travel experiences, remarkable conceptual places to stay, unexplored cultures, and ancient histories of various towns and cities around the world. Join me in this journey of knowing more about travel. Get inspired to see the world and discover your inner self. Hi everyone. Today I am in conversation with Jessica Purcell. Jessica is a former chemistry teacher, and she believes that we can explore the natural world through science and sustainability. Jessica she's the founder of a website called Thoughtfully Sustainable. And she's also co-founder of a platform called Raising Global Kidizens. Thank you so much for joining me today, Jessica. I know it's 9 a.m. for you and 10 p.m. for me, but which is why you look all fresh.
Oh, thank you. Well, thank you for having me, Pyle. I was very thrilled to be able to chat with you and that you'd be willing to stay up till 10 p.m. to speak with me.
No, I was looking forward to it, as I said before we started the interview. So, Jessica, tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I started my journey in science in college. I got a degree in biology, specifically in marine biology. And like many aspiring marine biologists, I wanted to conserve everything under the sea, and wound up meeting my now husband as I was doing some undergraduate research. And after we were married, we wound up traveling all over the United States as he was pursuing a graduate degree. And I decided, with my biology background, one of the places we had moved to in the United States was Louisiana. And Louisiana was so desperate for science and math teachers that if you had a background in biology or math, they were actually willing to pay for you to go back to school to get your teaching certification so that you could be a classroom teacher. And so I pivoted from on my track from science and becoming a scientist to being an educator, and absolutely fell in love with working with students and trying to bring as much sustainability into the science classroom as I could, because my passion for conservation and sustainability, I think I was born with. So for the next 10, 15 years, I taught all over the US while my husband was getting his degree. And about 7 years ago, we were able to come back to where we both grew up in the state of Pennsylvania on the east coast of the US, and had the ability to stay home with my two children now. And although you probably know that as a teacher, it's hard to stop teaching. So instead of being in a formal classroom, I pivoted and decided to make an online platform to still share a lot of the science and sustainability lessons I've been doing in classrooms across the country.
How would you define sustainability?
That's a great question. Sustainability for me is really making choices that have been filtered through a lens of the environment. So making sure that, for example, for me, planting a garden in the backyard was important to not only be able to grow our own fresh food, and we are very lucky to have a backyard that gets plentiful sunshine, so we can grow, some things, but then also to really appreciate for myself and for my children where food comes from and how much time and effort it takes to grow food. So there's that value piece. When it comes to wasting food, obviously it's much less likely for you to throw out food that you've grown yourself because you put so much time and effort into. So I guess sustainability for me is really like taking a pause and making sure that everyday choices that we have control of are not only best for us, but best for the planet as well, or as good as they can be. In a modern society, you cannot do everything perfectly, and the sustainability, it has to be sustainable. You have to be able to do it over and over again in order for it to work for you. So
How do you think science and sustainability, how do they kind of merge, if that is the right word to use?
no, absolutely, that it's absolutely, I find that because the word sustainability has become such an easy buzzword,
Yeah.
and such a hot topic, especially for large businesses. They understand that people are interested in, what their choices mean more for themselves, but maybe for the environment. The idea of explaining the science behind sustainable living answers that question of why. For example, a lot of people are talking about composting and, oh, I should compost. That sounds cool. That's a neat thing to do. But if you don't understand the science of why it's really valuable, why diverting methane and other greenhouse gases from the atmosphere by simply putting your food scraps in a compost bin to make new soil versus throwing them in a landfill where they cannot decompose properly. I think for me, explaining the science really will help people transfer from, oh, that's a cool idea, but I don't have time for it, to, you know what, I'm going to make time for this because realistically, this is kind of simple. I could do this. And it's actually not just benefiting myself, but benefiting my community, benefiting the atmosphere around me. Um, and so I feel like the science is the hook, to get people to think about sustainable living as not just a fad, not just something a company's saying because they want you to buy their product, but really understanding that your daily actions can have an impact. And especially like you were saying, as you do them incrementally, step by step, over years, months, you can really reduce your carbon footprint, or how much carbon you and your family are putting into the atmosphere.
Okay, so what is your process? I mean, your website, uh, thoughtfully sustainable. What exactly? I know you have blogs on it, but do you also, I mean, just some of the stuff that you're doing.
Sure,
How are
sure,
you reaching out to kids and parents? What's the
sure. So
process?
So on the website, I've started putting all of the lessons that I've done with my own kids. I actually, through the pandemic for the past 2 years, I chose to homeschool my two. I have currently a 7-year-old and a 10-year-old. And so through that, the past 2.5 years, we obviously did a lot of science because, mom's a science teacher. So that was easy.
And dad's
And
a biologist.
right, and dad's a biologist. Yeah, we're definitely the science nerd family. And so I started creating lessons for them to do that were simple, that we didn't need to go out and buy a lot of materials for, that we could do in the backyard or in our kitchen, and started sharing them on social media, and found that there seemed to be a lot of interest in, a simple photosynthesis experiment we were doing, or a simple landfill science experiment. And so I decided to start writing them up on the blog and then creating free printable lessons to go along with them to make the science really accessible, so that anyone that was interested, if they Googled sustainability science or science experiments for the environment or something like that, that they could come across some things, they could have some free, really accessible lessons that they could do with their students, either in the classroom or at home. And that seemed to, people seem to find value in that. And so from there, I went on and actually started creating in-person workshops for students and for parents and for homeschool students. And so just recently, I wrapped up a unit with a homeschool community here on, most of the students were on the East Coast of the United States. And we went through a whole 7-week series on composting. And for kids that thought, we're going to talk about rotting vegetables, we had a lot of fun. For 7 weeks, we met online and we walked through the process of composting and had all kinds of fun with food scraps. And I'm not sure how their parents feel about all the things we were playing with, but I think everyone had a good time and learned a lot. And then from there, it's amazing how there's good and bad with social media platforms, obviously, but there's so much good in being able to connect with other like-minded individuals over specific topics like sustainability and raising kids with a more eco-friendly lens. And I wound up connecting with another woman who lives in Philadelphia, it's just about an hour from me, with similar interests. And then we got together and have created a secondary platform that you had mentioned, Raising Global Kidizens, which actually has a much more global audience, because we've created educational resources that go along with 17 Sustainable Development Goals from the United Nations. And unfortunately, in the United States, the Sustainable Development Goals are still relatively new. Educators aren't maybe as familiar with them, but we found that across the globe, they're being implemented into the classrooms much more. And so we wanted to create resources for educators, both formal and informal, so that they didn't have to do the legwork of finding how can we bring sustainability into our classroom if we're just trying to teach second and third graders to read. Maybe we want a sustainability focus, but we don't have the time to research books and resources. And so we compile all of those things for educators to be able to use.
Can you highlight just a couple more programs that you or modules that you had, or some initiatives that you've taken through your website as well as this other platform?
So another lesson that I've done for a couple years now that seems to have gotten a lot of great results, because it's visualizing something that we can't see. A lot of chemistry is so very tiny that to the naked eye, you can't see the process happening. And so I had come across a landfill experiment as a simulation that actually will simulate when you take food scraps and you throw them into your trash, which then goes to a landfill, or in some aspects, maybe an incinerator here in the United States, versus composting, what actually happens to that food. And obviously, in a landfill situation, there is no oxygen. And so it doesn't break down the same way it would naturally out in nature. And that has to do with the bacteria that are present. And so this little simulation actually shows, if you take a banana peel and you put it in an environment there is no oxygen gas, or very little oxygen gas, it will start to decompose and create gases. But those gases aren't good. They're methane and carbon dioxide. And so the experiment is simply a plastic bottle filled with water, some banana peel, and a balloon on the top. You sit it on a sunny windowsill, and within a week or so, all of a sudden the balloon begins to expand and expand and expand. And so students and parents, and honestly, we've done the experiment with some retirement communities as well, see that, oh, I see, there's actually a lot of gas being formed. And that gas, now, it's not methane in our simulation, because we'd have to be able to test it, and that'd be getting too down in the weeds. But they can see that through decomposition, the process of things breaking down in an anoxic or non-oxygen environment creates a whole bunch of methane gas. And methane is so very good, 25 times better than carbon dioxide at holding in heat. And so that's why when we talk about greenhouse gases and, our climate changing, that's one of the big ones we don't want to add anymore into the environment. We don't want that methane. And so just that simple visualization that takes, maybe 15 minutes to set up and a week to just sit on a sunny windowsill, to see that has really seemed to make an impact for both students. And when I say students of all ages, the retirement community that we had done that um, experiment for, we're just as thrilled as kids that we've done it for, because you're actually bringing the science, to life and letting them see what happens. A couple other modules that I've created was creating book lists of women scientists and the conservation work that they've been doing all across the globe, with picture books and some simple reading activities so that parents and teachers can utilize those in their classroom. We've done a huge workbook on windmills, which incorporated English and math and science and social studies. So all those key areas of learning, but surrounding it around the theme of wind energy and the pros and cons of wind energy. We try to be diligent in knowing that, there isn't a perfect solution anywhere, and that different communities will require different things, and that there's always pros and cons to every new endeavor when it comes to renewable energy. And so explaining that within a way that students aren't overwhelmed by it, but that it's also not presented as this is the solution, the end. We want to make sure that we're cognizant of creating things that will create more conversations.
Yeah.
And so through my platform of Thoughtfully Sustainable, I'm very science focused. And then through Raising Global Kidizens, we add in the other disciplines as well, of English language arts and math and social studies. And so
it's been so nice talking to you, Jessica. Thank you. And you mentioned your books. So what are the names of the books?
Oh, yeah. So
the titles, yeah.
Right. So the one book that I was a co-author on is How to Raise a Global Citizen. And in there are 7 of us, 7 parents from all over the globe, that are contributing where we fit into trying to make, better global citizens. And obviously with my science background, mine's very science focused.
Yeah.
But it's a lovely compilation of parents' thoughts on, how to best raise global citizens. And then the workbooks that we've created are available on both blogs, on Thoughtfully Sustainable and on Raising Global Kidizens. We have on Thoughtfully Sustainable, everything's free. It's free for free downloads. And then on Raising Global Kidizens, some of the larger activity books like the wind energy, I think that wound up coming out to be like 70 pages worth of content. We have a little shop link and you can access those as well.
Great. I'm sure the listeners and the viewers will get onto it. And I think it's commendable, the kind of work that you're doing.
Thank you, Pat.
And you are making a difference. And that's the most important thing. And so, I really appreciate that. And I'm happy that I've been able to share your story on my platform, Now Boarding. And I'm sure, in this way, your message and the message of what Now Boarding is, as a podcast trying to do, will reach out to a lot more people. So again, thank you so much.
Thank you. I was honored to be part of your platform and reviewing the guests that you've had. It's humbling to think that you would want to speak with me about what I'm doing. So thank you very much. And thank you for bringing so much of the work to light, to your community.
Thank you so much. And I think no work is little. So I think every person who's been a guest on my show has something or the other to contribute, and there's a learning for everyone. And I think what you're doing also will reach out to a lot of people. And I think there's a learning for everyone, even with what you're doing. So, like I said, no amount of work is less when you have a passion for it, and and the effort that you put into it. It has to, and the message, and the fact that you're so, I know it's a science background, but sustainability is such an important factor in your life, and so the way you're trying to combine it, simplify science, but at the same time communicate your knowledge in a simple way to a lot more people, reaching out to so many different communities, and I think that is so important. Hope you enjoyed this episode of Now Boarding, a travel podcast. Check out other episodes on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or wherever else you listen to podcasts. And of course, don't forget to share your thoughts with us. Stay tuned for more exciting episodes only on Now Boarding, a travel podcast.